The Alaskan wilderness holds thousands of secrets, but what hunters discovered in March 1947 in a remote corner of the Kenai Peninsula left even seasoned trackers speechless. On the banks of a nameless river, hundreds of miles from the nearest settlement, they stumbled upon neatly constructed log cabins. Smoke rose from the chimneys into the frigid sky, but that wasn't what shocked the hunters most. From the doorways emerged women of Asian appearance in homemade fur coats from bear hides, followed by a bearded man in a worn U.S. Army uniform. The women spoke among themselves in Japanese. The lead hunter, Garrett Walsh, would later tell his fellow townspeople, "We thought it was a hallucination from the cold. Japanese women in our wilderness, living like family with an American soldier." But it was reality. A reality that had begun 2 years earlier in the spring of '45, when the war was drawing to a close and people's fates were intertwining in the most incredible ways. The story of Elijah Bradford and 7 women isn't just a tale of survival in harsh conditions. It's a narrative about how humanity can triumph where it seemed only hatred should reign. About how, in the remote wilderness, far from laws and orders, 8 people created their own world, a world where former enemies became each other's only support. Contemporaries said that when this story was first heard in the territorial capital, no one believed it. It seemed too incredible. An American soldier saves Japanese women and takes them into the wilderness? In those times, when people were sent to internment camps for lesser offenses. But documents from that era, eyewitness testimony, and, most importantly, accounts from the participants themselves, paint a breathtaking picture. Elijah Bradford wasn't a hero in the classical sense. He was an ordinary man faced with a choice between orders and conscience. And he chose conscience. This choice changed not only his life, but the fates of 7 women who should have perished in the chaos of war's final days. But the most surprising part awaited everyone at the end, when justice of that era had to render its verdict. Who was this man who dared to go against the system to save yesterday's enemies? Elijah Bradford was born in 1918 in a small town outside Seattle, Washington. His father was a blacksmith, hence the middle name that had been passed down through generations. His mother kept a garden and raised 4 children. Elijah was the eldest. From age 10, he helped his father in the smithy, but his soul was drawn to the forest. His grandfather on his mother's side was a hereditary hunter and trapper, and it was he who taught his grandson to read animal tracks, find direction by the stars, and survive in the wilderness with just a knife. "The forest is alive," his grandfather would tell young Eli. "Respect it, and it will feed you. Disrespect it, and it will kill you." This simple wisdom of American frontiersmen would later save 8 lives in the remote Alaskan wilderness. Elijah knew how to build a winter shelter, where to find edible roots, how to hunt without a rifle if necessary. He knew which herbs healed and which killed. He could predict weather by bird behavior and wind direction. When the war began, Elijah was 23. A month before that, he'd married Clara, daughter of the town's schoolteacher. The wedding was modest but cheerful. Clara, in a white dress sewn by her mother, seemed to Elijah the most beautiful woman in the world. They dreamed of children, of their own home, of living long and happily together. December 7th, 1941 shattered those dreams. The draft notice came 3 days after Pearl Harbor. Clara didn't cry at their parting, only hugged him tight and whispered, "Come back to me." Elijah kissed her hair, which smelled of wildflowers, and swore he would return. In the freight car taking recruits to basic training, he didn't yet know he was seeing his hometown for the last time. Clara would wait for him all 4 years of the war, then 2 more years, refusing to believe the official papers stating that Private Bradford was missing in action. At the front, Elijah quickly earned his fellow soldiers' respect, not for heroics. He didn't throw himself at machine gun nests or charge into bayonet attacks yelling war cries. They valued him for something else. His ability to find food where others saw only mud and ruins. His capacity to predict where the Japanese would set ambushes. The fact that he could lead a group through terrain others considered impassable. "Bradford's like a damn forest spirit. Knows things an ordinary man can't know," they said about him in the battalion. By spring of '45, Elijah had fought from the Philippines to Okinawa. He'd been wounded twice, shell-shocked, but always returned to duty. On his uniform, 2 bronze stars and a silver star. But he didn't feel like a hero, just did what needed doing. Fought, survived, helped others survive. And then, on April 25th, 1945, with only days until victory, fate prepared a test for him that no military training could prepare him for. A test of conscience. It began with a routine reconnaissance patrol. The morning of April 25th was foggy and cold. Bradford's recon group, 5 men, moved along an abandoned road toward a small compound. The mission was simple. Scout the area, determine if any Japanese forces remained. The war was winding down, but that made the enemy more dangerous. A cornered animal fights most desperately. Elijah knew this firsthand, had seen how Japanese soldiers, doomed to defeat, fought to their last bullet, preferring death to surrender. They discovered the camp by accident. Corporal Jensen, walking point, suddenly raised his hand. Signal to halt. Around the bend, in a ravine, barracks surrounded by half-destroyed barbed wire were visible. The gates stood wide open. At the entrance, 2 bodies in Japanese uniforms. Fresh blood on the ground indicated the killing happened recently, maybe an hour or 2 ago. "Sergeant, maybe we should go around?" whispered Private Murphy, the youngest in the group, an 18-year-old kid from Ohio. But Elijah was already studying the camp through binoculars. Movement. Someone was alive inside, and judging by everything, not soldiers. A decision had to be made quickly. Main forces were supposed to arrive in a few hours, but what would happen to those in the camp during that time? They entered cautiously, ready for any surprises. The first thing that caught the eye, signs of hasty flight. Abandoned documents, scattered Japanese uniforms, empty ammunition crates. The guards had fled, taking everything valuable. Then Elijah heard voices. Female voices. They came from the far barracks, speaking Japanese, but in the intonations he heard not fear, but some kind of resigned calm. The barracks door was slightly open. Elijah pushed it with his foot, holding his rifle ready. What he saw inside made him lower his weapon. 7 women stood in a semicircle holding hands. The youngest, a girl about 18 with a bandaged arm. The oldest, a woman with gray strands in dark hair. All wore the uniforms of Japanese military nurses, red crosses on their armbands. All had dry eyes, no tears. They were prepared for the worst and had accepted their fate. But what struck Elijah most was the one standing slightly ahead of the others. Tall, dark-haired, with straight posture despite a bruise under her left eye. In her dark brown eyes there was no pleading or fear, only exhaustion and some strange dignity. Later he would learn her name was Keiko, that she was a schoolteacher's daughter from Kyoto, that she'd dreamed of becoming a pediatrician, but in that moment for him, she was simply a human being who needed help. The eldest of the women, Masako, spoke first, in broken English, mixing tenses and articles, but understandably enough. "We, medical personnel, not combatants, treated everyone, Japanese, American, Filipino. We have documents." She extended a stack of papers with official seals to Elijah. Indeed, staff of Evacuation Hospital number 217. In the war's final weeks, their hospital had become a collection point for all wounded, regardless of nationality. The chaos of retreat mixed all the cards, and then the hospital was bombed. Only they survived, 7 nurses abandoned by their superiors to their fate. But their story was even more tragic than it first appeared. Private Murphy shifted nervously. "Sergeant, maybe we should take them to our people, let command sort it out." The logic of wartime was simple and cruel. Prisoners, interrogation camp. They'd figure out who's who there. But Elijah knew what an interrogation camp meant for women, especially Japanese women, especially young ones. He'd seen what happened in such places, broken lives and extinguished eyes. And even if they weren't touched, years behind barbed wire, the brand of enemy for life. Masako continued speaking hurriedly as if afraid she wouldn't be heard out. "We hid here 3 days. Guards fled day before yesterday, killed camp commander. He wanted to use us as human shields during retreat. We could have left, but where? Ahead your troops, behind our own who would shoot us as deserters? We're not enemies. We just want to live." Keiko added something in Japanese and Masako translated. "She says we have medicines, hidden, morphine, sulfa drugs, bandages. We can give everything. Just don't send us there." In that there, one could hear all the horror of women understanding their fate in war's grinding machine. Elijah was silent, weighing the situation. On one hand, orders and military duty. On the other, 7 lives, depending on his decision. Jensen, oldest in the group by age, a 40-year-old man from Wyoming, quietly said, "Eli, you better think this through carefully. Our guys will be here soon. They'll take the women. End of story. But you, what are you planning? To save them? Japanese women, after everything that happened?" After everything that happened, Elijah remembered it all. The bodies at Pearl Harbor, tortured prisoners on Bataan, the mass grave of American POWs they'd found when liberating one camp. He remembered his friend Tommy's face after the Japanese had tortured him, but he also saw before him 7 women who personally hadn't committed these crimes, who, judging by documents, had actually saved lives, including American soldiers, if one believed the hospital journal entries. Fumiko, one of twin sisters, suddenly fell to her knees, unable to bear the tension. Her sister, Haruko, caught her, quickly whispering something in Japanese. The youngest, Yuki, cried silently, biting her lip until it bled. Only Keiko continued standing straight, looking Elijah in the eyes, and in that gaze he read not a plea, but a question. What kind of man are you? Who are you when no one's watching? And then a plan was born in Elijah's mind. Insane, dangerous, almost impossible, that could cost him not just his military career but his life. Court-martial didn't mess around with those who helped the enemy. But something inside him, that thing his grandfather called conscience, wouldn't let him simply follow orders. "Jensen," he said decisively, "take Murphy and Williams, go back to our people, report the camp's empty, guards fled, no prisoners. Got it?" Jensen's eyes widened. "Eli, what are you thinking? What about the women?" Elijah looked at him with a heavy gaze. "What women? You see any women?" "I sure don't. Empty camp, abandoned. Everyone fled." Jensen shook his head, but understanding flickered in his eyes. He was a father of 3 daughters. "All right, Eli, whatever you say. Just take care of yourself." Remaining with the women and Corporal Hayes, his fellow Washingtonian whom he trusted like himself, Elijah laid out his plan. They'd go into the wilderness, far away, where no one would find them. They'd wait out the war's end until passions cooled, and then they'd see. Masako translated. The women listened with disbelief and hope simultaneously. Keiko was first to ask through the translator, "Why? Why are you doing this?" Elijah didn't know what to answer, how to explain what he himself didn't fully understand. But the hardest part was still ahead. The decision was made, but the path to salvation was just beginning. Elijah understood. Time was catastrophically short. American advance units could appear any moment. They had to act quickly, but without panic. First, he sent Hayes to survey the surroundings, find transport, anything still running. He stayed with the women, trying to explain through Masako what awaited them. "Listen carefully," he said, with Masako translating, stumbling over words in her anxiety. "We're heading east into the mountains. There are places where you won't meet people for years. Hunting cabins, abandoned settlements. The war will end soon. Maybe in a week, maybe a month. But after the war, there'll be chaos, revenge, tribunals. You understand what awaits you. At best, a POW camp. At worst..." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. The women understood everything. Keiko asked something and Masako translated. "She asks what will happen to you if they find out you helped us." Elijah smiled crookedly. "Me? Firing squad, or at best the stockade, which is almost the same thing. But there's one trick. Officially, I'll die. Go missing in action during a reconnaissance mission. Hayes will confirm he saw me get hit by artillery. Body not found. It happens." The youngest of the women, Yuki, an 18-year-old girl from a small village near Osaka, suddenly burst into tears. Her nerves couldn't take it. She spoke rapidly in Japanese, sobbing and wiping tears with her sleeve. Masako translated. "She says she doesn't want to die, that her sick mother in Osaka is waiting for her, that she didn't want the war. She was mobilized by force." Elijah looked at the girl, still just a child, younger than his youngest sister. In that moment, he finally understood he was doing the right thing. Hayes returned an hour later with good news. 2 kilometers from the camp, he'd found an abandoned Japanese truck. Little fuel, but enough for about 200 miles. After that, wilderness, on foot from there. But first, they needed to gather everything necessary for survival, and here those hidden medicines Masako had mentioned came in handy. But they were hidden for a reason. "You understand?" Masako explained as they walked to the cache. "Camp Commandant Major Tanaka, he was a special kind of man. Loved power over the defenseless. When they brought us here 3 days ago, he immediately made clear what he expected from us. We're nurses. We'd seen wounded, blood, death. But what he proposed..." Keiko refused first. He hit her. "You saw the bruise?" Then said in the morning he'd execute one of us as an example, the youngest. Yuki. Elijah listened, cold fury rising within him. War is war, but there are things unacceptable even in war. Masako continued. "At night we couldn't sleep thinking what to do, and in the morning panic began. Your forces broke through the defenses. The guards prepared to flee. Tanaka ordered them to take us along as human shields. And then..." She fell silent, choosing words. "Then one of the guards, an old corporal named Sato. He has a daughter, Yuki's age. He shot Tanaka. Told the others the major wanted to surrender to Americans. They believed him in the panic, fled, and Sato stayed, gave us his pistol, showed where medicines and food were hidden, said, 'Survive however you can,' and left. We never saw him again." The cache was in the basement of a destroyed building near the camp. Several crates of medicines, canned food, hardtack, even some medical alcohol. But most valuable were warm items, overcoats, blankets, several pairs of boots. For survival in the Alaskan wilderness, this was worth more than gold. While the women changed into more practical clothing, Elijah and Hayes loaded supplies into the truck. "Listen, Eli," Hayes said, lighting a hand-rolled cigarette. "I'm with you till the end. We're both from Washington, same state. But you understand what you're getting into. This isn't just desertion. They'll call it treason." Elijah silently tossed crates into the truck bed, then answered, "What's the country? The country isn't just orders from brass, it's also conscience. My mama, God rest her soul, always said, 'Elijah, live so you won't be ashamed to look people in the eyes.' So that's what I'm doing." The truck didn't start right away, had to fiddle with the engine. The Japanese women sat in the truck bed covered with canvas. Only Keiko sat in the cab. She knew a little English and could help with translation if needed. Elijah drove. Hayes, with rifle ready, watched for danger. The road went through forest, pocked with craters, sometimes completely destroyed. But that was even better, less chance of meeting anyone. The first checkpoint appeared after 50 miles. American, 2 soldiers with rifles. Elijah felt Keiko tense beside him. Her hand involuntarily grabbed his sleeve. "Easy," he whispered. "Stay quiet and don't look at them." The soldiers were young, tired, clearly rear echelon. Seeing the American uniform, they didn't even check documents. "Where you coming from, Sergeant?" one asked lazily. "From recon, taking captured medical supplies to the field hospital." The soldier glanced in the truck, saw crates with red crosses, waved them through. "Go ahead." Only 10 kilometers later did Keiko release her fingers that had been digging into Elijah's sleeve. Red marks from her nails remained on his wrist. She said something in Japanese very quietly, then added in broken English, "Thank you." Elijah nodded without taking his eyes off the road. Ahead was wilderness, vast, impenetrable, saving wilderness. But would they reach it? The second checkpoint proved more difficult. Military police. These checked everyone. A lieutenant with cold eyes studied Elijah's documents for a long time, then ordered them to show what was in the truck bed. Had to open the canvas. 7 frightened female faces looked at the MP. He frowned. "Who are these?" Elijah forced himself to speak calmly, even with a note of tired irritation. "Medical personnel from a liberated camp. Koreans, Filipinos, our allies, Lieutenant. Taking them to base for processing and further assignment." He handed over captured Japanese documents, calculating the MP couldn't read Japanese. The calculation paid off. The officer leafed through papers with seals, looked at red crosses on crates. "Why no convoy?" he asked suspiciously. "Well, the war's ending, Lieutenant," Elijah shrugged. "Everyone's at the front. I got ordered to transport them, so I'm transporting. Not far. Field hospital near Anchorage. That's where I'm headed." Anchorage was in the opposite direction, but the MP either didn't know or didn't want to know. War had exhausted everyone, even military police. "All right, move along," he waved. "Just make sure your allies don't run off." Another 100 miles. Fuel was running out. The road got worse and worse, then disappeared entirely. A forest trail began that the truck couldn't navigate. Elijah stopped the vehicle at the forest's edge. From here began their journey into the unknown. How many miles would they have to walk? 100, 200, 500? He didn't know. Only knew they had to get as far as possible from roads, settlements, from war. "From here, we walk," he said, and Masako translated to the others. The women climbed out of the truck bed, stretched stiff legs. Aiko and Hana, 2 middle-aged nurses about whom Elijah knew least, silently began helping unload supplies. Professional habit. Don't waste energy on unnecessary talk. Do what needs doing. Fumiko and Haruko, the twins, stayed together as if afraid to lose each other even for a minute. Yuki still sobbed occasionally, but had pulled herself together. Keiko approached Elijah while he was draining remaining fuel from the tank into a canister. Would be useful for starting fires. "I want to say," she began in English, carefully choosing words. "We understand. You risk, very risk for us, for enemies. Why?" Elijah looked at her. In the last rays of setting sun, her hair seemed to shimmer with blue-black highlights. "You're not enemies," he said simply. "You're people, and I just can't do otherwise." Hayes, meanwhile, was figuring how to distribute the load. Medicines, canned goods, warm clothing, tools they'd managed to find in the truck. All this had to be carried. "The girls are weak," Hayes said to Elijah in their Pacific Northwest drawl so the Japanese women wouldn't understand. They'll walk 10 miles and collapse. But he underestimated military hospital nurses. These women had carried wounded under fire, worked shifts without sleep, seen death and pain. They were stronger than they looked. The first night in the forest became a test for everyone. Elijah didn't risk lighting a fire. Smoke could be spotted. They settled under a large spruce whose branches created a natural shelter. The women huddled together, covered with all available blankets. Elijah and Hayes took turns on watch. The forest lived its nocturnal life. An owl hooted. Somewhere in the distance a wolf howled. Small animals rustled in the undergrowth. For the Pacific Northwest men, these sounds were familiar, almost homely. For the Japanese women, frightening and alien. At dawn, they moved on. Elijah led the group along animal trails only he could see. He avoided swampy areas, found fords across streams, chose the easier path. But easier is a relative concept. By midday, Yuki was the first to fall, simply sat on a fallen tree and burst into tears. Her feet, in broken shoes, there weren't enough boots for everyone, were bloody. Keiko sat beside her, speaking softly in Japanese, then took off her own boots and gave them to the girl. She herself walked in Yuki's shoes. So passed the first day of travel. By evening, they reached a small river. Here, Elijah decided to make their first real stop. They lit a fire. They'd gone far enough from roads. Hayes caught fish in the river with his bare hands, an old frontiersman's method. They made soup in a kettle found in the truck. The women ate silently, hungrily. Evidently, during several days in the camp, they'd barely eaten. After dinner, Masako organized a medical examination. Everyone had blistered feet. Fumiko had a deep cut on her palm from some branch. Aiko had developing fever, probably a cold. They used medicines sparingly, but iodine and bandages were applied. Elijah observed how the women cared for each other and thought, maybe they have a chance. Maybe they'll really survive in the wilderness if they learn, if he has time to teach them. But ahead lay trials they didn't yet suspect. The third day brought the first real danger. Morning began with distant barking of dogs. Elijah woke instantly, listened. The barking was approaching. Pursuit or just local hunters? Either way, they had to leave quickly. He shook Hayes awake. Hayes understood without words. The women woke from the men's sharp movements, exchanged frightened glances. Masako translated Elijah's brief order. Pack up, move, silence. They walked almost at a run for a whole hour. Elijah zigzagged. Confused tracks led the group through streams and over rocky slides where tracks don't remain. The women gasped for breath but didn't complain. Fear drove them forward better than any persuasion. Only when the dog barking faded in the distance did Elijah allow them to stop. Everyone collapsed on the ground, gulping air. Fumiko pressed against her sister, crying silently. Yuki's hands shook. Even unflappable Hana had gone pale. Those weren't after us, Elijah said, more reassuring himself than others. Most likely local hunters or catching deserters. Lots of AWOL soldiers wandering the forests. But a residue remained. They weren't alone in this wilderness, and any encounter could be fatal. They had to go farther, deeper, to where even hunters don't go. By midday, they came to a swamp, huge as far as the eye could see, with stunted trees and ominous silence. Going around would lose 2 days. Going straight through risked drowning in quicksand. Elijah studied the terrain for a long time, looking for signs of animal trails. Animals aren't stupid. They know where it's safe to cross. Finally, he found a barely visible path winding between hummocks. Listen carefully, he said, with Masako translating. Single file, step in my exact footsteps. 1 step left or right, you'll sink. If you feel your foot going under, don't jerk, call out. Better to lose a boot than a life. Keiko conveyed his words to the others with a glance, adding something of her own. The women nodded, determination in their eyes. Crossing the swamp took 4 hours. 4 hours of nightmare. Twice Haruko sank to her knees. They pulled her out, holding her arms. Once Aiko stumbled, nearly fell into black muck, but Hana managed to catch her. When they finally reached solid ground, everyone was covered in mud, exhausted, but alive. And that was the main thing. That evening they found what Elijah had been searching for, an old hunting cabin. Half destroyed, but with walls intact and roof holding. Inside were bunks, a wood stove, even some utensils. Evidently, the last hunters had been here at least 5 years ago. An ideal shelter for their first stop. "We'll stay here tonight," Elijah decided. "Maybe stop for a couple of days. Need to recover, tend wounds." The women gratefully dropped their loads. Hayes went to check the surroundings. Elijah set about fixing the stove. The work went smoothly. His hands remembered the movements from childhood when he'd helped his father repair stoves in their town. Masako organized the women with Germanic precision. Some cleaned the cabin of years of dirt, others carried water from a nearby stream. A third group sorted through supplies. Keiko and Hana conducted medical examinations. Everyone had blistered feet, scratches, bruises. Yuki, the youngest, gathered kindling for starting fires. Even in this wilderness, in this uncertain situation, they maintained human dignity, order, mutual support. By night, the cabin was transformed. The stove crackled cheerfully. Blankets were laid on the bunks. In a pot bubbled porridge from their remaining grain. For the first time in 3 days, they were warm, under a roof, in relative safety. The women relaxed, even began quietly talking among themselves. Elijah caught himself admiring the scene, golden firelight on faces, Fumiko's quiet laughter at her sister's joke, Keiko's concentrated expression as she mended someone's clothing. After dinner, Masako told their stories. Each had something to lose, something to flee from, something to grieve. Aiko had lost her husband at Guadalcanal, 2 sons in the Philippines. Left completely alone, she became a nurse to somehow dull the pain. Hana was from Hiroshima. Her house burned during American firebombing. Her entire family perished. Fumiko and Haruko grew up in an orphanage after their parents died. War took away the last thing they had. Each other they feared losing most in the world. Keiko's story was special. Her father, a teacher of literature and philosophy, had refused to support militarism. Wasn't a resistance hero, just quietly refused. He was dismissed from his teaching position. The family struggled. Keiko became a nurse to feed her younger siblings. Her father was arrested in '44. Someone informed that he listened to American radio. She never saw him again. Her mother died of grief a month later. Her siblings were evacuated to unknown locations. "I don't even know if they're alive," she finished her story, and Masako translated these words in a trembling voice. Elijah listened and thought about fate's strangeness. These women weren't enemies. They were victims of war, just like millions of others. They'd just had the misfortune of being born on the other side of the front, and now their fates were in his hands. More precisely, in the wilderness's hands, which doesn't distinguish nationalities. For it, all are equal. The strong survive, the weak perish. That night he was awakened by a strange sound. Someone was crying quietly. He listened. Yuki. The girl sat by the cooling stove, arms wrapped around her knees, sobbing silently. Elijah approached, sat beside her. Didn't know what to say, how to comfort, just sat. After some time she began speaking in Japanese, but he understood from her intonation, telling about home, about her mother, about pre-war life, about going to school, about dreaming of becoming a music teacher, about playing piano. An ordinary girl with ordinary dreams, thrown by war into the Alaskan wilderness. Gradually she calmed down, dozed off, leaning against his shoulder. Elijah carefully carried her to the bunks, covered her with a blanket. Keiko wasn't sleeping, watching him from her corner. When their eyes met, she nodded. "Thank you." And in that nod was more trust than in all words. But the hardest part was still ahead. The wilderness was only beginning to test them. On the 5th day at the cabin, what Elijah feared most happened. Internal conflict. It started with a small thing. Fumiko took the last piece of bread without asking the others. Hana made a remark, word for word, and soon the women were shouting at each other in Japanese. Haruko defended her sister. Aiko tried to calm everyone. Yuki cried in the corner. Masako translated frantically.
"She says we'll all die here."
That one responds, "We should have been shot immediately. Lord, what should we do?" Elijah understood. This was a crisis. 5 days of fear, exhaustion, uncertainty, nerves at the breaking point. If he didn't intervene now, the group would fall apart. And alone in the wilderness, no one survives. He whistled sharply, piercingly, the way his grandfather had taught him. The women fell silent, stared at him. "Enough," he said firmly, and even without translation his tone was clear. "Masako, translate word for word. You want to live? Then listen to the rules. First, we're one group, one family. Anyone who disagrees can leave right now. We'll see how long you last in the wilderness alone. A day? 2? Second, food is divided equally, always, even if it's the last crumb. Third, everyone works to their ability. No work, no food. Fourth, I make decisions while we're in the wilderness because I know how to survive and you don't. When we get out, live however you want. Everyone understand?" The women were silent, processing what they'd heard. Keiko spoke first, calmly, deliberately, looking Elijah in the eyes. Masako translated. "She says you're right, that we must stick together, that she agrees with your rules and will follow them." One by one, the women nodded. Even Fumiko, the instigator of the quarrel, murmured something agreeable. But Elijah understood. Rules alone weren't enough. He had to give them purpose, activities, hope. "Tomorrow we start learning," he announced. "Learning to survive. Not hiding and waiting, but living, building, hunting, preparing supplies for winter. Yes, for winter. Because the war might end tomorrow or in 6 months, and winter will come regardless. In Alaska, it comes early and doesn't forgive mistakes." The following days turned into intensive survival school. Elijah taught the women everything he knew: how to set snares for rabbits, how to distinguish edible mushrooms from poisonous ones, how to read animal tracks, how to predict weather by signs. Hayes taught them to handle weapons in case they had to defend against animals or people. Keiko proved an apt student. She had an analytical mind. She quickly grasped patterns, remembered details. After a week, she could set a snare herself, start a fire without matches, find north by moss on trees. Hana and Aiko took over housekeeping, cooking, gathering herbs for tea, drying mushrooms. The twins handled sewing, altering clothes to be more practical for forest life. Even Yuki found her role. She turned out to have perfect pitch. She heard approaching animals or people long before the others. But most important, routine appeared. Daily schedule, responsibilities, small rituals, morning tea by the fire, evening patrol of the territory, Sunday bath. Elijah taught them to make a field bath by stretching canvas over heated rocks. These simple things restored a sense of normal life, human dignity. One evening, Masako told Elijah a story she'd been afraid to tell before. Her husband, an army captain, died in the Philippines. But before being sent to the front, he'd said strange words to her. "If we lose this war, and we will lose, I know it, try to survive at any cost. And remember, not all Americans are beasts, as propaganda claims. Among them are people. Real people." Masako looked at Elijah. "He was right. You are human." Thank you. Relationships in the group gradually improved. The bread quarrel didn't repeat. On the contrary, the women began caring for each other with redoubled effort. When Aiko sprained her ankle, everyone took turns watching over her. When Haruko developed fever, they shared their last aspirin tablets. They were becoming what Elijah had said. Family. Strange, forced, but family. Special relations developed between Elijah and Keiko. They often found themselves alone, hunting, patrolling territory. By the evening fire, they spoke little. Language barrier interfered, but understood each other without words. A glance, gesture, smile. Keiko learned to read his mood by the tilt of his head, how he rolled his cigarette. He knew she was tired by how she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, that she thought of home by her gaze directed west. Once she asked him through Masako, "Do you have family?" "A wife?" Elijah paused, then answered. "Had a fiancé. Clara. Probably thinks I'm dead. Maybe it's for the best." Keiko wanted to say something, but thought better of it. Just touched his hand lightly for a moment, and that was enough. But idle couldn't last forever. In the third week of their stay at the cabin, Hayes returned from patrol with alarming news. "Eli, there are fresh tracks, human tracks. 3 or 4 men passed about 2 miles from here, and a dog with them." So they weren't alone in this wilderness. And it was unknown who these people were: hunters, escaped POWs, deserters, friends, or enemies. In any case, staying at the cabin was becoming dangerous. They had to go deeper. But where? And would they have strength for a new journey? The decision to leave came hard. The cabin had become almost home, the first safe place after days of fear and flight. But traces of strangers 2 miles away was too close, too dangerous. Elijah gathered everyone by the stove where the last logs crackled, spoke slowly, giving Masako time to translate. Understanding each word could be either sentence or salvation. "Listen to me carefully. Those people who passed nearby, they'll come back. Maybe tomorrow, maybe in a week, but they'll return. Hunters remember places with shelter. And if they're not hunters?" He paused, letting the women figure it out themselves. "If they're escaped prisoners or deserters, they might be looking for exactly such cabins. Food, roof, maybe weapons. And if they find us here..." Keiko interrupted him with something in rapid Japanese. Masako translated. "She asks, if we leave, where? Deeper into the wilderness, but there are no shelters there. Soon autumn, then winter. How will we survive without a roof?" A logical question, a frightening question. But Elijah had an answer. Insane, almost impossible, but the only possible one. "We'll build our own shelter. There are places in Alaska where people haven't been for decades. We'll find such a place and settle in. Not temporarily, for the long term. Maybe a year, maybe 2. He saw how the women's eyes widened, how Yuki pressed against Masako seeking support. But he also saw how Keiko slowly nodded. She understood the necessity of this decision. Hana, always silent, suddenly spoke for a long time, emotionally, which was unlike her. Masako translated. "She says she worked in a hospital during the siege of Manila, saw how people survived in impossible conditions, ate anything, drank dirty water, and survived because they wanted to live, because they were together. She says, if Filipinos could do it, so can we." Strange irony of fate. A Japanese nurse remembers the Manila siege as an example of resilience. But there was no hypocrisy in her words. She truly admired the courage of those people, even though she'd been on the other side. War had taught her to see in the enemy first and foremost a human being, suffering, struggling, surviving. Packing took 2 days. They needed to take everything valuable but not overload themselves. A long journey lay ahead. Elijah and Hayes made a stretcher from poles and canvas for carrying the heaviest items. The women packed medicines, sewed backpacks from whatever was at hand. Keiko compiled a priority list: what to take necessarily, what's desirable, what can be left. Her organization and clear thinking amazed Elijah. This seemingly fragile girl possessed a steel core. The last night at the cabin, no one slept. They sat by the fire, each thinking their own thoughts. Fumiko quietly sang some Japanese song, a lullaby Elijah understood. Haruko joined in, their voices merging in strange harmony. Aiko mended Hayes's torn shirt. Maternal instinct demanded caring for someone. Yuki drew with charcoal on birch bark, a house with a garden, a dog, the sun. A child's drawing by an 18-year-old girl longing for lost childhood. Keiko sat next to Elijah, their shoulders almost touched. She studied his handmade map of the area, trying to understand the route. "Far?" she asked in English, struggling with the words. "Far," Elijah nodded. 5, 6 days' walk, maybe more. She was quiet, then added, "I trust you. We reach." And in this simple phrase was more intimacy than in any declaration. In the morning, they left before dawn. Fog swirled between trees, making the forest look like scenery for a fairy tale. Only this fairy tale was frightening. Elijah walked ahead, blazing trail. Behind him, the women, carrying the stretcher with supplies in pairs. Hayes brought up the rear, sweeping away tracks with a spruce branch. Professional scout habit: leave no trace. The first day passed relatively calmly. By evening, they reached a small lake, camped on shore. Hayes caught fish, they made soup, even lit a big fire. Here it was safe, too far from human habitation. The women warmed by the fire, dried damp clothes. Mood was almost upbeat. Movement gave an illusion of control over the situation. On the third day came what everyone feared but didn't speak aloud: encounter with wild animals. A bear. Huge, brown. It came onto the trail about 20 yards from them, stood on hind legs, sniffing. The women froze. Yuki gripped Masako's arm so tight her knuckles went white. Elijah slowly took the rifle off his shoulder. One shot available. If he missed, game over for all of them. But shooting wasn't necessary. The bear stood a while, dropped to all fours, and unhurriedly went into the thicket. Well-fed autumn bear, busy fattening before hibernation. Wasn't interested in humans. When danger passed, Fumiko fell to her knees and sobbed. Her nerves gave out. The others weren't in better shape. Only Keiko remained standing, but Elijah saw how her hands trembled. "That's a good sign," he said, trying to sound confident. "The bear left. Means it accepted us. The wilderness accepts us." A beautiful lie, but necessary. The women needed faith, hope in anything, even mystical protection of the forest. On the 5th day, they reached the place Elijah had been seeking, a small clearing by a stream, protected on 3 sides by cliffs. Natural shelter from winds. Nearby forest full of game and edible plants. Stream, clean water and fish. To the nearest human settlement, at least 100 miles of impassable wilderness. Perfect place for those who want to disappear. "Here," Elijah said. "Here we'll build a home." The women looked at the empty clearing, and in their eyes the question was readable. How? How to build a house without tools, without materials, without experience? But Elijah was already giving instructions. Hayes went to fell young trees for framing. He himself began marking out a place for an earth lodge. Yes, the first winter they'd have to live in an earth lodge, but that's better than freezing under open sky. Work began in earnest. The women carried stones for the hearth, gathered moss for insulation, wove something like mats from willow twigs. Keiko organized a real construction site, distributed responsibilities, monitored completion, solved arising problems. By evening, the frame of future dwelling already stood on the clearing. Primitive, rough, but it was a beginning of their new life in the Alaskan wilderness. That night, when everyone slept exhausted from work, Elijah sat by the fire thinking about the future. The war must end soon. What then? Return to his former life? He couldn't anymore. Deserter, traitor, harborer of enemies. The women also couldn't simply return home. Their homes most likely no longer existed. So this clearing, this wilderness, their common home. For a long time, maybe forever, and how they arranged their life here would determine whether they survived the winter. And winter in Alaska doesn't forgive mistakes. Building the Earth Lodge took 2 weeks of hellish labor, every day from dawn to dusk, digging, hauling logs, caulking cracks with moss, smearing walls with clay. The women's hands, accustomed to medical instruments, became covered with calluses and abrasions. Nails broke, hair tangled, clothes turned to rags. But no one complained. Everyone understood this was a matter of life and death. Elijah taught them to lay logs properly so walls wouldn't collapse under the weight of the earth roof. Hayes crafted simple furniture, bunks, a table, benches. The women, under Hannah's leadership, who turned out surprisingly practical, made a stove from stones and clay. Primitive, but functional. Heat is life in the Alaskan wilderness. Once, when work was in full swing, Haruko suddenly fell unconscious. Just picked up a log, swayed, and collapsed. Keiko rushed to her, felt her pulse, lifted her eyelids. "Exhaustion," she said in English, having learned this word from Elijah. "Need food. Real food. Meat." The food problem was acute. Canned goods, long gone. Flour, finished. Only dried mushrooms and berries remained. Fish in the stream, too small. Couldn't catch enough. They had to hunt. But only 10 cartridges remained for the rifle. Every shot had to count. Elijah took Keiko hunting with him. She could move quietly, not spook game, and importantly, he trusted her. They walked silently all day, tracking a deer. Finally spotted one, young buck grazing in a clearing. Elijah took aim, held his breath. Keiko froze beside him, afraid even to blink. The shot. The deer jerked and fell. Hit. When they approached the carcass, Keiko turned away. After all, a city girl, unaccustomed to the sight of blood. But then she pulled herself together, helped dress the carcass. Learned quickly how to remove hide, separate meat from bones, what could be used, what couldn't. By evening, they returned to camp loaded with meat. The women greeted them like heroes. That evening, for the first time in many days, everyone ate their fill. But the joy was short-lived. The next day, Yuki, on duty at the stream, came running in panic. "People! There! People!" she shouted in Japanese. Even without translation, everyone understood. Elijah grabbed the rifle, Hayes an axe, carefully crept to the stream. Indeed, on the other bank, about 100 yards away, 2 men, bearded, in ragged clothes, with homemade spears, escaped prisoners or deserters. What's the difference? Either way, dangerous. The men hadn't noticed Elijah and Hayes, engrossed in fishing, but this was a bad sign. If these 2 were here, maybe others nearby. Their refuge wasn't so secret after all. Elijah gestured to retreat, returned to camp, called an emergency meeting. "They didn't see us," Elijah said, "but they might stumble upon us by chance. We need to be ready." Masako translated. The women exchanged tense glances. Keiko asked, "What do we do? Leave again?" Elijah shook his head. "Too late. The lodge is almost ready. Winter's close. We'll defend ourselves if we have to." The following days passed in anxious anticipation. Posted sentries, slept in shifts, But the fugitives didn't appear again. Maybe they'd moved on. Maybe found another place. The wilderness is big, room for everyone. But a residue remained. They weren't alone in this desolation, and any encounter could turn catastrophic. They finished the Earth Lodge in early October, just in time. Nights were already freezing. In the mornings, grass covered with frost. First snow wouldn't be long. The new dwelling was cramped, 8 people in about 200 square feet, but warm. The stove Hannah built drew excellently. Cracks caulked so thoroughly not a single draft penetrated. On the bunks, bear hides, trophy from another successful hunt. Almost cozy. They celebrated the first evening in their new home modestly but warmly. Aiko made stew from venison with mushrooms. Fumiko and Haruko sang a Japanese song about home and hearth. Masako told a funny story from her youth. Even taciturn Hana smiled. Yuki drew their portraits with charcoal on the wall. Primitive but recognizable, their strange family. Keiko sat next to Elijah on the bench, close enough that he felt the warmth of her body. "Thank you," she said in English, "for everything." He wanted to answer that it was nothing, that he was just doing what he had to, but he stayed silent because he felt that something greater was happening between them than just rescue and gratitude. That night, when everyone slept, he went outside to breathe. The sky was clear, stars bright, as they only are in the wilderness, far from city lights. Somewhere out there, under these same stars, the war was ending. People were killing each other, cities burning, borders changing. And here, in remote Alaskan wilderness, 8 people of different nationalities were simply trying to survive together. Behind him, the door creaked. Keiko wrapped Elijah's coat around his shoulders, herself huddled in a blanket, stood beside him, also gazing at stars. "In Kyoto," she said quietly, "I loved watching stars with my father. He knew all constellations, told Greek myths, Cassiopeia, Orion, Big Dipper." She pointed at the sky, and Elijah looked at her profile in moonlight. "Here, same stars," she continued. "So we on same planet. So somewhere is home." Elijah wanted to say her home was probably destroyed, that Kyoto had been bombed by Americans, but he stayed silent. Let her hope. Hope is also a way to survive. They stood side by side silently, each thinking their own thoughts. Then Keiko took his hand. Simply took it and squeezed, and they stood like that, holding hands. 2 people brought together by war and wilderness. But winter was only beginning, and the most terrible trials lay ahead. The first snow fell in late October. Elijah woke to unusual silence. The wilderness had fallen silent under white cover. He looked out of the Earth Lodge, everything around transformed. Trees stood in snowcaps, the stream covered with first ice, animal tracks clearly printed in fresh snow. Beautiful and frightening. Because winter in the Alaskan wilderness isn't a fairy tale about snowflakes. It's survival at the edge of human capability. The women emerged outside, struck by the world's transformation. Yuki, like a child, caught snowflakes in her mouth. Fumiko and Haruko made a snowball. Even stern Hana smiled watching this scene. But Elijah saw something else. Their clothing wasn't ready for real frosts. Footwear would fall apart after a week walking in snow. Firewood supplies insufficient. And most importantly, food would last maximum a month, and winter would last 6 months. He gathered everyone in the Earth Lodge, explained the situation without embellishment. Masako translated, women's faces growing grimmer. "We need to prepare," Elijah said. "Insulate clothing, make supply stockpiles. Learn to travel on snowshoes. Without them, you can't survive winter in Alaska." Keiko, as always first, took charge of organization. Distributed tasks, who sews, who gathers firewood, who learns to set traps for fur-bearing animals. But a week after the first snow, something happened that nearly destroyed them all. Aiko fell ill. It started with a simple cough but quickly progressed to fever, delirium, wheezing in the chest. Pneumonia. In normal conditions, hospital, antibiotics, care. Here, primitive stove, remnants of wartime medicines, and prayers. Keiko and Hana kept vigil at her bedside around the clock, made her drink herbal teas, rubbed her chest with their last alcohol, changed cold compresses. On the third day of illness, Aiko began to suffocate, gasped, gulped air, lips turned blue. Keiko looked at Elijah in despair. What to do? No medicines. To the nearest hospital, hundreds of miles. And then Hayes remembered an old frontier method. Cupping. Hot cups on the back to draw blood from the lungs. Primitive, but sometimes it works. They used glass vials from medicine bottles, heated them on fire, quickly placed them on her back. Aiko screamed from pain, but breathing became easier. All night they sat with her, changing cups, maintaining warmth. By morning the crisis passed. Temperature dropped, breathing evened out. She survived. But it was a warning. Any illness here could be fatal. The next blow of fate came unexpectedly. Hayes went to check traps and didn't return. Waited until dark. Still no sign. Elijah took the rifle, followed the tracks. Found him 2 hours later. Hayes had fallen into an old bear den, abandoned, buried in snow. Leg twisted at unnatural angle. He himself unconscious from pain and cold. Pulling him out alone was impossible. Had to return for help. They pulled him out as a group. The women held the rope. Elijah descended into the pit, tied up Hayes, hauled him out carefully, trying not to damage the leg further. Brought him to the earth lodge, half alive. Keiko examined the break. Pleen fracture, bone not shattered. Set it, applied a splint from branches. Hayes screamed so loud it seemed he'd be heard for miles. But the leg was saved, though he wouldn't be able to walk for at least 2 months. Now all heavy work fell on Elijah, hunting, firewood, checking traps. The women helped as they could, but their strength wasn't enough for full work in winter wilderness. And here Keiko showed her worth. She began going hunting with Elijah, learned to set snares, even to shoot the rifle. First time missed a rabbit from 10 yards. Second time hit a squirrel in the tail. Third time took down a deer with clean shot to the heart. Evenings in the earth lodge established a special atmosphere. Everyone sat around the stove, busy with their tasks. Hana taught Yuki to knit, found a ball of wool yarn in old things. Fumiko and Haruko mended clothes, humming in half-voice. Masako told stories from her life, about pre-war Tokyo, about theaters and cafes, about normal life of normal people. Aiko, recovered from illness, prepared simple food, turning meager supplies into almost edible dishes. Hayes, confined to the bunks, crafted useful items, wooden spoons, bone needles, even carved something like chess pieces. So I don't go crazy from idleness, he explained. Taught the women English words, they taught him Japanese. Resulted in amusing language mix, but they understood each other better and better. Elijah and Keiko grew especially close during these weeks. Long hours, hunting. Silent partnership where each knows their role without words. She learned to read the forest almost like him, see tracks, sense danger, find the way. He taught her practical skills. She taught him Japanese words, told about her past life. Once, sitting in ambush on a deer trail, she asked, "Elijah, when war ends, what happens to us?" He was silent for a long time, then answered honestly, "Don't know. For my people, I'm now a traitor. For you, still an enemy. Maybe we'll have to hide here all our lives." She nodded. "I thought, if so, this not worst life. Here honest, No lies, no propaganda. Only forest, snow, and us. In December, real frosts hit. -40. Breath turned to ice crystals. Water froze before it could boil. Tried not to leave the Earth Lodge without extreme need, but need existed. Firewood, checking traps, hunting. Elijah got frostbite on his cheeks. Keiko got it on her hands. Treated as they knew how, rubbed with snow, then warmed by fire. Painful to tears, but necessary. And then a miracle happened. Small but important. In one of the traps, a sable, whole, undamaged, with luxurious fur. This was luck. Sable fur could have been traded for food and supplies if there'd been opportunity to reach people, but even just as trophy, as sign that the wilderness had accepted them, it was important. Yuki sewed a hat from the pelt for Aiko, who had no warm headwear. But the most terrible test awaited them ahead. On the eve of Christmas, the women calculated the date by notches, a blizzard began. Not just a snowstorm, a real whiteout when you can't see your own hand. 3 days and 3 nights, wind howled like something alive. Snow buried the entrance to the Earth Lodge, had to dig out every few hours. And then, the terrible thing happened. It was on the 2nd day of the blizzard. Yuki went out for firewood, just for a minute. The logs lay 3 yards from the entrance, but in the white chaos of blizzard, 3 yards turned into infinity. The girl lost orientation, went the wrong way. When they realized she was missing 10 minutes later, it was too late. In a blizzard, a person gets lost instantly. Elijah tied a rope around himself, gave the other end to the women to hold, went out into white hell. Shouted, called, but wind carried away his voice. Walked in circle as far as rope allowed. Nothing. Returned, took second rope, tied it to first, went out again. This time found her. Yuki sat under a tree 20 yards from the Earth Lodge, already losing consciousness from cold. Another half hour would have been too late. They thawed her out as a group, rubbed her with vodka, last precious drops, wrapped her in all available blankets. Keiko poured hot tea into her, spoon by spoon. Fumiko and Haruko rubbed her feet, restoring circulation. Misako read prayers in Japanese. Turned out she was deeply religious. By morning, Yuki came to, but her toes had turned black. 3rd-degree frostbite. Keiko made a terrible decision. The toes would have to be amputated. Otherwise, gangrene would set in. No instruments, no anesthesia, nightmarish conditions. But there was no choice. They performed the operation by light of a pine torch. Elijah held Yuki. Masako gave her a piece of leather to bite. Keiko worked with a hunting knife, sterilized in fire. 3 toes on the left foot. Yuki lost consciousness from pain on the second one. After the operation came the hardest part, nursing. Infection, fever, delirium. Their last sulfa drug tablets went into use. The women took turns on watch, not leaving the patient. On the 5th day, the temperature dropped. She survived. But now she'd be lame for life at 18 years old. This incident changed something in the group. If before they were just surviving together, now they'd become true family. Where one person's pain is everyone's pain. Where joy divides by 8. Where there are no strangers. Even the language barrier had almost disappeared. Everyone understood each other from a half-word, half-glance. In January 1946, the encounter they all feared occurred. People came to the Earth Lodge. 3 men in torn, padded jackets with homemade weapons. Escaped prisoners. Those whose tracks they'd seen in autumn. Thin, frostbitten, desperate, and very dangerous. Elijah noticed them first, heard the crunch of snow under foreign feet, gestured for the women to stay quiet, took the rifle himself. Hayes, still unable to walk, grabbed an axe. Keiko stood beside Elijah, hunting knife in hand. The other women huddled against the far wall. The fugitives stopped 10 yards from the Earth Lodge, talked among themselves, clearly not expecting to find people here. Then the tallest shouted, "Hey folks, come out peacefully. We need food and warm clothes. Hand them over and we won't touch you." Elijah understood. If they gave up food, they wouldn't survive themselves. But fighting 3 against 1, almost no chance. And then Masako stepped forward, calmly, with dignity, spoke in English with heavy accent. "We medical workers, International Red Cross, we have typhus, quarantine, dangerous to approach." Brilliant lie. The fugitives froze. Typhus is scary, almost certain death in the wilderness. The tall one took a step back. "Typhus, you say? Then why are you alive?" Masako didn't lose composure. "We're medics, know how to treat. But you don't. Want to risk it? Come closer. No food anyway, everything went for medicine." The fugitives exchanged glances, discussed something. Then the tall one shouted, "All right, live. But if you lied, we'll be back." And they left, simply turned and went into the forest. When danger passed, Elijah looked at Masako with respect. "Thank you. You saved everyone." She just smiled wryly. "I simply remembered how Russian POWs shied away from us when there was typhus epidemic in the hospital. Fear of contagion stronger than hunger." After this incident, they decided to strengthen defenses, made signal traps around the Earth Lodge, strings with tin cans tied to them. Any approach and ringing throughout the forest. Elijah trained the women to shoot the rifle. Even tiny Yuki, still limping on her injured foot, learned to aim and pull the trigger. But the main danger didn't come from outside. In February, food began running out. Meat long eaten, flour gone, only dried mushrooms and berries remained. Hunting brought no results. Animals had gone deeper into wilderness away from cold. Traps stood empty. Fish under ice wouldn't bite. Real hunger began. True, exhausting, mind-bending hunger. The twins weakened first. Fumiko and Haruko visibly melted away. Young bodies demanded calories. Then Yuki. After illness, she'd never fully recovered. Keiko divided her portion, giving half to the younger ones. Elijah noticed, but stayed silent. Knew he couldn't dissuade her. At the hardest moment, when it seemed all was lost, luck smiled. Elijah found a bear den. Not abandoned, alive. Mother bear with cub. This was a chance. Meat, fat, hides, but also deadly risk. Wounded she-bear is a killing machine, and only 3 cartridges left. They decided to act with cunning, smoke the bear out, force her into the open. The plan worked halfway. The she-bear came out, but not alone, with her cub, and Elijah faltered. Shooting a mother before her baby's eyes, even for survival, it was too much. But Keiko snatched the rifle from him, shot without hesitation, straight to the heart. The she-bear fell. The cub pressed against its dead mother's body, whimpering. "Him too, we have to," Hayes said. "Won't survive alone." But Keiko lowered the rifle. "No, enough death." They didn't touch the cub. It went into the forest, small, defenseless, doomed. But preserving remnants of humanity was more important than meat. The bear meat saved them from starvation. They melted the fat, used it for light and warmth, jerked the meat as best they could, divided the hide into parts, insulated footwear, patched holes in clothing. They made it to March, and in March, the first thaw began. Spring. They'd survived the first winter, but what awaited them next? Spring 1946 brought not only warmth and hope, it brought fear of exposure. As snow melted, the wilderness became passable, and that meant the likelihood of encountering people increased exponentially. Elijah understood. Sooner or later, they'd be found. Question was only who would find them first and how it would end. On May 23rd, everything was decided. The morning began as usual. Keiko and Hana prepared breakfast. Yuki, limping, carried water from the stream. The twins repaired the leaking roof of the earth lodge. Elijah and Hayes, who could finally walk, albeit with a cane, checked snares. And then came barking. Many dogs. And voices. American voices. Military commands. Manhunt. Elijah understood instantly. Not a chance encounter, but targeted search. Someone, one of those escaped prisoners they'd met in winter, apparently got caught and told about strange people in the wilderness, about women speaking a foreign language, about a man in American uniform hiding them. That was enough to launch an operation. There was nowhere to run. Yuki, with her crippled foot, wouldn't get far. Hayes couldn't move fast either. And where to run? They were being surrounded professionally, methodically, like driving wolves. Elijah made the only possible decision. Don't resist. Any attempt at defense would only lead to being shot on the spot. Everyone, without exception. Listen to me carefully, he told the women, Masako hurriedly translating. Now they'll arrest us. Don't resist, don't panic. Tell the truth, that you're nurses, that I saved you, that we were just surviving. Keiko, burn all documents in Japanese, everything that might compromise you, quickly. Keiko rushed to their meager possessions, letters the women had written each other during long winter evenings, Masako's diary, Yuki's drawings. Everything written in Japanese flew into the stove. Only Elijah's and Hayes's American documents remained. Maybe it would help. Maybe not, but worth trying. First onto the clearing came an MP officer, young, about 30, with cold gray eyes. Behind him, soldiers with rifles at ready. Many soldiers. Too many for arresting 8 people, so they considered them especially dangerous. This was bad. Very bad. Captain Hartwell, military police, the officer introduced himself. Everyone remain in place, hands where I can see them. Attempt to flee, shot on sight. His gaze slid over the women, lingered on Keiko. Well, well. Interesting company, Sergeant Bradford, if I'm not mistaken, listed as missing in action since April 45. And Corporal Hayes, also missing. And these, judging by everything, are your charges. Elijah stayed silent. Any words now could be used against them. Hartwell smirked. Silent. You're doing right. You'll talk plenty in a cell. Take them all. Women separately, men in shackles. Soldiers rushed to execute the order. The women huddled together in fear. Yuki cried. Fumiko and Haruko held hands so tightly their knuckles went white. Keiko took a step toward Elijah, but a soldier barred her way with his rifle butt. She looked at him over the guard's shoulder, and in her gaze was so much pain, fear, and love. Yes, love. The kind they'd never spoken aloud, but which had lived between them all these months. Elijah wanted to say something, but shackles already clicked on his wrists. They were led from the clearing like criminals. Officer ahead, guards on sides, dogs behind. The path to the trucks took 3 hours. 3 hours of silent march through wilderness that had become their home, past places where they'd hunted, past the stream where they'd washed clothes, past the clearing where Keiko had first shot a deer. Each step took them from phantom freedom and brought them closer to inevitable judgment. At the trucks they were separated. Women loaded into one, Elijah and Hayes into another. The last thing Elijah saw was Keiko's face in a small barred window. She wasn't crying. Held herself together, as always. His strong Japanese girl who'd learned to survive in Alaskan wilderness, but hadn't learned the main thing, to be invisible in a world where any difference is punished. The truck bed stank of sweat, fear, and hopelessness. Besides Elijah and Hayes, 3 others were there. Those same escaped prisoners they'd encountered in winter, beaten bloody but alive. The tall one recognized Elijah, laughed hoarsely. Ha! The typhus crew. Thought you'd outsmarted us. Nah, brother. You can't hide from Uncle Sam in the wilderness. We got caught after a week and told them about you, under torture, just so you know. So no hard feelings. Hayes spat. You're no man. You're scum. The prisoner shrugged. Man? Who here's a man? You saved Japs. Man or traitor? I robbed supply trains. Thief or fighter against injustice? We're all just meat for the system's grinder, brother. Only you haven't figured it out yet. The road to regional headquarters took a day. Changed trucks several times, crossed rivers, zigzagged through forest roads. Elijah understood they weren't being taken to ordinary jail. This was a special convoy, special precautions. Meant the case was political, aiding the enemy, treason, capital offenses. At headquarters, they were placed in separate cells. Elijah ended up in solitary. Cold stone box, 2 by 3 yards. Bucket in corner, bunk without mattress, bulb under ceiling that never went dark, day or night. And silence. Terrible, oppressive silence where you only hear your own breathing and heartbeat. The first interrogation began after 3 days. Investigator, middle-aged major with tired face and folder of documents. Tell me, Bradford. Everything from the beginning. How you found the Japs. Why you didn't turn them over to authorities. Where you plan to flee. Who you're connected with in Japanese intelligence. Elijah told the truth. About the camp. About the decision to save the women. About survival in wilderness. Committed no crimes. Understand what you're charged with? The major asked after 3 hours of interrogation. Treason, desertion, harboring war criminals, fraternization with the enemy. At the word fraternization, Elijah flinched. The major noticed. Hit a nerve? That blonde one, Keiko, right? Pretty girl. You two were close, weren't you? Elijah stayed silent. Major leaned back. Stay quiet. We'll write it down as confirmation. Interrogations went on day after day. Same questions, same answers. Sometimes they changed tactics, threatened with firing squad, then promised leniency if he'd confess to espionage. Elijah held to one version. Saved the women from human compassion. In the wilderness, just survived, committed no crimes. Trial was set for July 15th. Closed proceedings. No press, no public. Only judges, prosecutor, defense attorney, and defendants. They brought Elijah to the courtroom first, then Hayes, then the women, thinner in prison clothes, but alive. All alive. Even Yuki, barely staying on her feet. Keiko met his gaze for a moment, and in her eyes he read what he felt himself. Whatever happened, they didn't regret it. The prosecutor was eloquent, spoke of betrayal, of thousands of American women tortured in Japanese camps, of a soldier's duty to his country, demanded capital punishment for Elijah and Hayes, 10 years camps for the women. These so-called nurses serviced the Japanese war machine, prolonging the fascist beast's agony. And these two, forgetting oath and duty, didn't just harbor enemies. They lived with them, shared bread and shelter while their comrades died on the battlefields. Defense counsel stammered something incoherent about mitigating circumstances, about the women being medical personnel, about Elijah acting from humanitarian motives. The judges listened with stone faces. Verdict seemed predetermined. And then Masako asked to speak. In broken English, mixing words but with such force of conviction that the courtroom fell silent. Honored court, I want tell truth. Yes, we Japanese. Yes, we served in Wehrmacht hospital. But we also saved 17 American POWs in war's last days. Here documents. She handed the judge a stack of papers, those they hadn't managed to burn. Records from the hospital journal where American names were written in black and white among the treated. When Japanese command ordered stop treating POWs and leave them die, We disobeyed. We hid them, shared our rations, nursed them. 3 of them should be alive. Michael Thompson from Oregon, James Walker from Texas, Peter Kowalski from New York. Find them. Ask. They confirm. The judge frowned, leafed through the documents. Indeed, names, dates, diagnoses, everything looked authentic. Called a recess. 2 days checking information, and they found them. Michael Thompson, returned from captivity, worked at a lumber mill in Oregon, called by telegram. He came, gaunt, with shaking hands, but alive, stood before court and said, "Yes, these women saved my life. I had gangrene. Japanese doctor ordered left to die, but this one," he pointed at Keiko, "secretly operated on me at night. Without her, I'd have rotted." Found Walker and Kowalski too, all confirmed. These Japanese women risked their lives saving American soldiers. Atmosphere in the courtroom changed. Prosecutor was flustered, demanded time for additional investigation. But then the presiding judge stood, old colonel with 4 medals on his chest, and said what no one expected. "Fellow judges, I've fought since 1917. World War I, the Pacific, Korea, seen much death and much betrayal, but also seen how humanity manifests in the most terrible conditions. These women, enemies by birth, but they saved our soldiers. This man," he nodded at Elijah, "broke his oath, but he saved 7 lives, including lives of those who saved ours." The colonel paused, then continued. "The war's over. Time to learn to live in peace. Yes, they spent 2 years in wilderness. Punishment, I think, sufficient. I propose releasing all on recognizance. Women to be repatriated to occupied Japan, Bradford and Hayes restored to rights, sent to settlement in Alaska without right to leave for 5 years, but no camp. Who's for?" Voting was brief. 3 for, 1 abstained. Sentence meaning life, not freedom, but life. The courtroom erupted. Yuki sobbed, the twins embraced. Even stern Hana wiped tears. And Keiko looked at Elijah across the whole courtroom, and in her gaze was everything: gratitude, sorrow, farewell, and promise to remember. They were separated that same day. The women were sent to Japan 2 weeks later. Elijah managed to see Keiko 1 more time, 5 minutes visit under guard. She only had time to say, "Thank you for everything. I'll always remember," and kissed him quickly, desperately, in front of the guard. Their first and last kiss. Elijah and Hayes were sent to a settlement in northern Alaska. Not prison, but not freedom either. Worked at logging, lived in barracks with other exiles. A year later, Elijah received a letter without return address, through 10th hands. Brief. Everyone alive. Masako married. Yuki studying to be nurse. Twins work in hospital. Hana went to America to relatives. Aiko died. Heart. I remember the wilderness. Remember snow. Remember you. K. No more letters came. After 5 years, Elijah was allowed to return to the lower 48. He settled in a small town in Oregon, worked as a forest ranger, married a veteran's widow, raised her children as his own, lived a quiet, unremarkable life. Died in 1987, never having told anyone this story in full. And Keiko? They said she became a doctor in post-war Japan, that she married a Japanese businessman, that she had 3 children, that she named her eldest son Elijah, an American name. But those are just rumors. One thing is known for certain. In 1990, after the Berlin Wall fell, the Anchorage Museum received a package from Japan. In it was a stack of photographs, that same clearing in the wilderness, taken by unknown photographer in summer 1989. And a short note. They survived. They loved. They remained human. No signature, but museum staff claimed the handwriting was feminine, and the envelope smelled of French perfume with notes of pine. The story of Elijah Bradford and 7 Japanese women isn't just a tale of survival. It's testimony that even in the most terrible times, when the world is divided into us and them, when hatred is considered duty and mercy treason, humanity finds a way to break through. Like those rare flowers that grow in Alaska among permafrost. Beautiful, fragile, but surprisingly tenacious. They all survived. In the wilderness, in prisons, in separation, in memory of each other. And maybe that's the real victory. Not over the enemy, but over circumstances, over the system, over your own fear. Victory of the human in humanity. The kind that doesn't make it into history textbooks, but without which history has no meaning.